Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm Heather Landy. I'm the editor of Quartz at Work, which is the modern workplace edition of Quartz. If you're not familiar, we are an online guide to the global economy. Our website is qz.com. We are here with a team in Davos all week. We are producing a Davos edition of the Quartz Daily Brief, which you are all welcome to sign up for. It's a free email in your inbox every morning, giving you a rundown of what to expect the day ahead and all the latest gossip from the night before. So if you have questions about that, feel free to ask. So the workplace, in case you've not noticed, but I gather everybody in this room has noticed, is evolving at warp speed now. In under a decade, we have unwound traditional features of the workplace that have been around for a half century or more. And we've invented new features that are reshaping the workplace in terms of how and when and even where we work. So today you'll be hearing a range of viewpoints from business, from academia, about how we can enable career readiness for the new form of work and shape skill sets so that they are as adaptable as business now needs them to be. Before I introduce the great panel that we have for you today, I'd like to start us off by welcoming Erik Brynjolfsson. He's the director of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy and a professor at MIT Sloan School of Management. His research examines the effects of technology on business strategy, productivity, and performance. His courses at MIT include The Economics of Information, and he's the author of several books, including his 2014 co-authored bestseller, The Second Machine Age: Work, Progress, and Prosperity in a Time of Brilliant Technologies. So Erik, please take the stage. We'll be back soon with our panel.
Hello. Thanks, Heather. It's really a delight to be here, and I'm very happy in particular to have a chance to discuss some of the ways the workforce is changing. We are in the midst of a big revolution, as Donald Trump alluded to, but the one I'm going to focus on is a technology-driven revolution. So I think here, we can talk a little bit about particularly how machine learning is transforming the economy and the new collar, the new kinds of jobs that are being created, what it means not just for technology, but more importantly, for people. Now, I'm a techno-optimist. I'm excited about what technology can do, but I also know that technology is not enough. And there's this quote that we use in our book, which is that computers are useless because they only give you answers. And Pablo Picasso said that a long time ago. And maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, it's certainly a bit of an exaggeration, but there's, of course, a nugget of truth in there, that the real value comes not simply from taking an existing problem and knowing how to solve it, but from conceiving of the new challenges and the new opportunities. And this is an area where humans have the big advantage. And I think it's often neglected that when machines are able to solve problems, that the value add comes from understanding those capabilities and then improving them. That said, I think that the progress in machine learning has been absolutely eye-popping. So just to share some of the data on that, here's data from ImageNet. This is the ability to recognize images like this. Machines used to be terrible at it. Then Jeff Hinton and his colleagues introduced deep learning neural net techniques. Suddenly they got much, much better, to the point now where they can identify leopards and jaguars and different breeds of dog much better than I can or most humans can. So they're actually superhuman performance in image recognition tasks. Similarly, we see it in voice recognition and speech recognition and in making diagnoses. Practically every week you see something. I just happened to pull up Nature last week, and there was yet another article about machines outperforming human doctors, in this case radiologists, diagnosing breast cancer. So I could go through a litany of places where machines have outperformed humans, but there are many tasks that humans still have the advantage. So working with Tom Mitchell, the head of machine learning at Carnegie Mellon, we developed a rubric, sort of a questionnaire that any of you can apply to a given specific task, and it will score it and tell you whether that task is likely to be suitable for machine learning. So we published this in the journal Science, and there's a set of questions like this that you can apply. And then you can rate the individual tasks and the individual occupations to see where machine learning is likely, I think, will have an impact over the next 5 years or so. For instance, if you look at radiologists, I mentioned that earlier. I knew that radiologists interpret images. So that's something that machines can do very well. But they also do all these other things. For instance, they can often conduct physical exams, something you wouldn't really want a machine to be doing. And this is a pattern we saw in most of the occupations, that there were certain specific tasks that machine learning could do very well, many other tasks where humans have a relative comparative advantage, and understanding that has been the focus of this work. So let me show you a few results from that, and then we'll open it up and we'll just have the panel weigh in on some of it. You can take this and you can zoom in now. We have it for several dozen countries now. You could zoom in on the United States and see which jobs are impacted by machine learning. For instance, let's zoom in on physicians, and here's radiologists. They have a score of 2.8, in part because of the image recognition, but it's maybe not as high as you would have thought because there's also the other things that they do. So it's one of those jobs that's going to be restructured quite a bit as different parts of it get allocated to machines. You can zoom in on different countries, like here's Germany. Overall has a somewhat higher score, meaning that more of its jobs and more of the tasks done in Germany are vulnerable to machine learning than the tasks done in the United States. And China, actually somewhat lower. There's a lot of field and crop vegetable growers who aren't going to be super affected by machine learning in China. Brazil, et cetera. We can also do it by company. This is the retail sector. That red dot is Walmart. It has a lot of jobs that are vulnerable to machine learning according to our analysis. This is a major bank in the banking sector. I'm not going to say which one. You can see the vulnerability growing over time significantly, especially for things like mortgage loan officers, personal banker, customer service reps. They have a lot of red there, meaning a lot of the specific tasks they're doing are suitable for machine learning. But there's opportunities there too, and this gets into what the new collar jobs are. One possibility is that some of those people will become what we call personal banker 2.0. These are jobs like the old personal bankers, but de-emphasizing the parts that machines can do and focusing on the parts that humans have a comparative advantage. Others are going to go into new roles like business analyst, mortgage loan officer, or some of them even software engineer. They have a lot of skills that could work for those. Now, let me just wrap up by saying that I'm quite excited about this technology, but one of the big puzzles for me, and I think for people in Davos, in Washington, in Congress that I talk to, is where's the productivity? Because there's no question these machines are now superhuman in many specific tasks, but if you look at the data, productivity growth has not increased. It has slowed everywhere. In fact, the US used to have almost double the productivity growth last year, and yes, this includes the very last quarter. Productivity growth was half of what it used to be. Last quarter in the United States, believe it or not, productivity growth was actually slightly negative. So there's a disconnect there between remarkable technologies are not being translated into business results. And I think this is, by the way, this is not just the United States. Almost every OECD country is seeing the same pattern, about a 50% slowdown in the rate of productivity growth. I think this is a huge challenge for our society and our businesses. There are a lot of reasons, and I've written quite a bit about this, but I think the one that's most relevant to this panel, and probably the most important one, is that we're not taking these remarkable technologies and reinventing our businesses to take advantage of them. We're not redesigning our business processes. We're not developing new business models or even new products and services. And so I'll come back to Pablo Picasso's quote and say that technology is great, but it's not enough. We're not facing the end of work where machines can do everything. Instead, we're facing a restructuring. We need to rethink how we run businesses, and that's really hard. That's something that managers aren't pulling their load on. The technologists are delivering these technologies, but managers, entrepreneurs, policymakers aren't doing enough to restructure work. So the winners going forward will be the ones who ask the right questions, who ask, how do we leverage creativity? How do we leverage emotional intelligence? More broadly, how do we build on the many, many tasks where humans have a comparative advantage and de-emphasize or offload to machines the other sets of tasks? That's a challenge that I think could take years to implement, but I think Infosys and the other panelists can talk a little bit about the way that we can take advantage of these remarkable technologies to deliver productivity and ultimately shared prosperity. So there's a lot more. If you go to any of these websites, you can read all the papers and documents for free. You can use the suitability for machine learning rubric if you'd like. And of course, I'd be happy to chat with any of you after the session's over. But with that, why don't we turn it over to the panelists to dive into these really important, challenging questions. Thanks very much.
What are some disruptive ways of recruiting and training and retaining and reskilling talent in the digital age? So we have this great expert panel to help us sort that out. So I'm going to start here with George Oliver on my left as chairman and CEO of Johnson Controls. A trained mechanical engineer, he spent more than 20 years at General Electric before serving as CEO of Tyco and came to Johnson Controls through Tyco's merger in 2016 with Johnson. To his left, Frida Polly is co-founder and CEO of Pymetrics, a startup that uses the latest in cognitive neuroscience to spot talent for some well-known clients. Frida was trained in neuroscience at Harvard and MIT, and if you have concerns that algorithmic hiring is riddled with bias, she can explain the best ways to avoid that outcome. To her left, Brad Keywell is the founder and CEO of Uptake Technologies, an industrial AI software company. He's also co-founded several other companies, including Groupon, MediaOcean, Tempest, Driven, and Echo Global Logistics. He's a philanthropist back home in Chicago and an adjunct professor at University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. And to his left, finally, Ravi Kumar, who is a president of Infosys and really one of the most thoughtful people that I have come across in the world of the future of work. And not just thoughtful, but actually taking action to do something about what he is seeing out there. And I think there are some chancellors of some well-known high-tier four-year schools and presidents of community colleges around the United States who will agree with that assessment and tell you what a force he has been in preparing a new generation of students for careers in IT. So I met Ravi for the first time a year ago here in Davos, and what was meant to be, I think, a 30-minute get-to-know-you coffee went on for hours until his publicist got concerned he was going to miss his flight home. And I would like to think it was because, and maybe Ravi would too, that we're just such great conversationalists, but the truth is there's just so much to talk about when it comes to the future of work. One of the things Ravi explained to me that day that has really stuck with me ever since is the idea that as technology gets better and better at solving problems, what we will need more and more from human talent is problem finders, people who understand how to find problems. And so we're going to tackle that as a panel today. But Ravi, maybe we can just start with you to lay out this concept of problem finders versus problem solvers and what got you thinking about it in those terms.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Heather, for those kind words. Thank you for joining the panel today. So machines really, as Eric pointed out, are continuing to evolve. And as humans transition from work today to work of the future, which would be a combination of machines plus humans plus gig. And I kind of want to add gig because it's kind of the ability to get scale, agility, and the flexibility to add to your workforce. The frontier of problem solving would move to machines, and progressively machines would take over problem solving, which is what all of us at work do today, irrespective of the kind of jobs we do. In fact, in the Industrial Revolution, as jobs moved from farm to factories to supermarkets, problem solving still remained the common denominator. But the future with machines is going to take problem solving and analytical skills completely away. And that is going to keep the human frontier with creativity and problem finding. New age digitally native companies really do that. They do that for a living. They find problems, they find gaps in existing operating and business models, and they use those gaps to build new businesses. So digitally native firms intrinsically do that. In fact, going back to Eric's comments about work and cognitive skills, there are two kinds of skills. There is repetitive, patterned, modeled skills, and there are cognitive skills which have emotional quotient and which are done by humans. I was just looking at some of the research, and my hypothesis is now starting to fail, which is biotechnology and AI coming together, and therefore, capturing the human frontier, which is actually about emotional quotients. You can actually really turn that around to machines as well. So problem finding is not in an equilibrium. As research continues to move, problem solving will keep taking away by machines. Problem finding will continue to be sharpened. And if biotechnology really comes in fore, with AI, problem finding will get much sharper as we go forward. So that's broadly how I saw it. And I think work is going to move to that creative roles which we are looking for. And that's why we need to be prepared for a shift, which I think the reskilling needed to move from problem solving to finding is a much bigger shift. And therefore, the previous reskilling efforts which happened during the Industrial Revolution are not good enough. And therefore, reskilling will move from individuals to institutions, organizations, governments, and academic institutions coming together. Those ecosystems will play a big role because this is a much bigger leap than ever before.
Brad, will AI, though, catch up to humans in that regard? I mean, we're seeing AI, more and more use cases for problem solving. Are you also finding that AI can be used for problem finding? Are there examples for that?
What we're focused on at Uptake is specifically using machine learning for machines and for the interaction of people and machines. From a framework perspective, reflecting on something that Eric talked about, the productivity improvements, if you sort of thematically trace it back through the last 2-3 decades, you might look to sheer effort as, just work harder as part of the improvement. You might look at process improvement, which began or was perhaps refined in Japan and brought by people like Deming to the United States and sort of improved process. The question is, then what? What's the next? Let's suppose there's an additional 5% productivity and reliability that is available, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in building controls, whatever it might be. You can be better, but how? Because the last 5% is not seeable or hearable by an unassisted human. That's where we're very interested, around where software can take data from the operational technology layer of a business and understand what it's saying. Almost listen to the machines and help the people that are responsible for optimizing the productivity and the reliability be better. Through that, you can unleash productivity. What we hope is that the leaders in in the major industries that would make up the Global 2000, that leaders can distinguish themselves by embracing and organizing themselves around capabilities like this, and then it'll become a norm. But right now, it's still the material used by the best, and part of why we're here in Davos is to be an advocate for the mandate, if you will, to go after that last 5% of better, because it doesn't just speak to being a better business, but it speaks to doing more with the same assets, being more environmentally responsible, for governments getting more productivity out of the same investments, so therefore spending less taxpayer dollars, and on and on.
And Frida, that we're seeing a backlash in many respects to AI and anxiety, especially where it intersects with humans, and what it might take away from us, or how it might be biased against us. But there are some ways that you see these technologies actually benefiting the future of work. What specifically do you see in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like Eric, I'm a techno-optimist, and I think that there are, academics making the case that it is much easier to detect and remove bias from artificial intelligence than it is to do that from a human. And I think there's lots of evidence to support that idea. I think AI is really just holding a mirror up to society. If you think about all the failures of AI, whether it's the Amazon resume parser or the credit card fiasco, it's really just stuff that's already happening in real life, but AI is sort of making it super obvious, right? So I actually think it's a huge opportunity we have to look at the systems we've built and say to ourselves, do we like what we've built? And if we don't like what we built, actually machine learning can help us rebuild them. And that's sort of the way that I think about artificial intelligence. I also think that when it comes to hiring, there's a little bit of a disconnect between what's actually happening in the real world and what people think is happening. Meaning, I don't know how many in the room have recently gone through a hiring experience. I started Pymetrics because I was an academic scientist at Harvard and MIT, and then I went to business school, and I saw hiring firsthand because that's what MBA students do for 2 years. And I was kind of blown away by how terrible it was, right? And I think a lot of people that are opining about what is going on in the real world haven't been through a hiring process in the last 2 decades. And unfortunately, what is happening, and there's academic studies of this, Ifoima Ajunwa has done some great work on automated hiring platforms. So automated hiring platforms, non-AI based, have been becoming more and more prevalent since the 1990s. And it's really very blunt tools that look for keywords. And if you have a BA in computer science as opposed to a BS, you're going to get kicked out of that system, right? So the point is that automated hiring has been around for decades. Now what I think is scaring people, it's a variety of things. It's techlash, it's all sorts of things. But I think that AI actually provides a much less blunt tool than a lot of the automated processes that are already happening across the board in hiring, and can also be audited in a very sophisticated way for the types of biases that unfortunately, you're biased, I'm biased, we're all biased here, and it's pretty impossible to remove those biases from human beings. So
to keep you on the hot seat for a minute longer, in terms of AI and sussing out problem-finding skills, creativity, empathy, like those sound like terms that skills that might be useful for someone looking for problems. Are those easily measurable in an AI sense? They're certainly not from a resume.
People talk about AI and the data that you put into an AI interchangeably, and we should just make that distinction. There's the machine learning element of artificial intelligence, and then there's just the data that you're feeding, the machine learning algorithms. And so, at our company, the behavioral science component has really allowed us to measure things that previously were thought to be not measurable. And again, that's the cognitive science piece that we derive from academia. So I do believe that we are becoming more and more sophisticated at measuring these things. And again, if you think about the base case, how do we, so again, what we automate or what we help improve is the 6-second scan of a resume that a recruiter normally does. So I'd love for somebody to tell me how you're going to derive empathy or something else from a 6-second scan of my resume, right? So let's just, again, the base case, like whereas we're putting people through a 30-minute program that detects, 70 plus different features that have been, determined by scientists to be predictive. So again, I think that we have to think about very specific use cases when we're talking about AI and the problems versus the solutions that it could be offering.
Okay. We've worked our way down to the panel now. I didn't order they all sat in random order. We just kind of happened to have the conversation flow this way. But George, does this idea of problem finding versus solving resonate with you? And are you seeing that shift play out at Johnson Controls?
Yeah, so it's good that I came at the end of the panel here because I can take perspectives that have been provided from the other panelists and put it in context with what we do. So we have, in Johnson Controls, we have over 100,000 employees across the globe. And what we do is we create sustainable solutions, we provide more secure solutions, more secure environments. And so when you look at what's happening within a company like ours, every aspect of what we do is changing, and it's because of the use of data. And so what I would say, whether you're at the manufacturing level or if you're in the sales force or if you're designing product, data is transforming your job. And so and we define structure in business today based on how we've always done business. And so incrementally, there's an infinite opportunity to improve processes with the use of data, with machine learning, and then ultimately more advanced with AI. And that's happening and transforming every role. And put on top of that, we turn over or hire about 15 to 20,000 employees. So think about not only taking the existing employee base, but then the new employee base to truly be positioned now to capitalize on what we see as the opportunity to infinitely improve how we operate today, but more important now, and what I would call those the problem solvers, where we define a problem, whether it's in manufacturing, we use data, we solve the problem, improve the process, ultimately drive the productivity. I think what's happening in our space, when I talk about the big problems and the problem finders, are the ones that are out working with customers and are defining new problems. When you think about the theme of WEF this year around sustainability and safety and security, that's what we do. And when we put all of our capability together with the use of not only the most leadership product, but then being able to then use the data in a way that ultimately optimizes what we do for the customer, we can reduce energy intensity or energy consumption by 40, 50%. Now, why isn't that happening today? Right, because we're structurally set up the way that we've always served the market and ultimately define the problems that we're solving. Versus now, I think what's happening at a leadership level, it's forcing leaders to develop digital acumen and then be able to apply that acumen in a much different way to much bigger problems. And then to be able to take those bigger problems and then structure and format how we go about solving those problems differently. And I think that's what's happening within our space, because there's such a value proposition to what we can do, and that's going to require a whole different level of skill sets. And so that's why I was fascinated by the discussion I had with Ravi, the work that Infosys has been doing around this topic, and the demand that all industrial companies are going to have to be able to ultimately position themselves to be a leader in the space that they're in today. And that is well underway. It's real. The idea that you can take every process today and apply machine learning and deliver what I would call incremental productivity, but the opportunity to really solve bigger problems and get at a much bigger level of productivity and solving much bigger problems is looking at it entirely differently. And then the ability to use AI and to take, we're developing a security solution today that, think of security as more alarms, and then response. Where today you can take multiples, it can be dozens of data streams, proactively predict an event pretty accurately. And think about that you don't have to have response, you can actually predict and be proactive in how you prevent fatalities or shootings or the like. And so that's stating the problem differently and ultimately attacking it with the capabilities that we have today with the use of data is going to require a whole different skill set.
I hesitate to bring up the topic of diversity only because it gets paid so much lip service, but it seems to me that if we're talking about finding talent that is good at either finding problems or structuring problems in a new way, that diversity is all the more essential. Because who else to find problems, maybe in sections of the world or in parts of society that whose problems just historically have gone unaddressed, right? There's probably problems that many people are extremely familiar with that the business world just hasn't paid much attention to before. How do we make sure that companies are not leaving too much on the table by having a workforce of problem finders whose ability is narrowed by their own experience or their worldview? How do we open this up to broader segments of society? I leave that to any of you who have ideas on it.
So maybe I'll take a first stab at it. So clearly, the reorganization of work, and as the future of work progresses, the creative skills will be a human frontier. There is a democratization of opportunity. Tech actually created a digital divide, if I may, but these new age technologies will actually bridge that divide. We are going to move from pure STEM skills needed in analytical jobs to non-STEM skills. So we have attempted liberal arts, and we're very happy with what we're doing with liberal arts and creating data scientists out of liberal arts. Design schools, humanities schools. These are the capabilities which are needed by humans in workplaces. It's a different matter that machines are now taking the frontier of creativity as well. If you take the 2018 AlphaZero program of Google, it actually defeated a chess champion, not a human, but actually a machine. Mm-hmm. And that's because the machine in the past, which was the stockfish machine, it actually built based on trends and past patterns. But AlphaZero program of Google actually built it through creative skills and hence it actually had moves in chess which were completely new. It wasn't even known to humans. So we don't know where this is going, and the equilibrium is not there. But at this point of time, creative skills are going to be with humans. If at all, machines are going to amplify those skills. So a diversity of talent, democratization of opportunity, moving away from degrees to stackable certifications and skills. In fact, we attempted community colleges. 8.5 million students in the US go to community colleges. Underserved, they don't have access to digital jobs. We believe they will land on digital backbone jobs. And we created an apprentice program which is enabling us to do so. The other big shift is learnability. And with Frida's organization, Pymetric, we are working on recruiting people with a learnability quotient. Unlike in the past where you had a job for life or a profession for life, you're going to have multiple professions in your life. And humans are living longer. So you're going to have multiple professions in life. And do we have the ability to move with a paradigm of learning which is just in time? In fact, all our lives, we did just in case learning. So we were taught in schools thinking something would be useful in our life. So that's called just in case learning. We will now get to a paradigm of just in time learning, which is I will have to absorb what I get and apply it to my job, learn to learn, learn to unlearn, learn to relearn. That's a huge skill we need in jobs. And finally, culture. You know, experimentation, innovation at scale, ability to fail fast, learn faster, which is all digitally native firms are good at. How do you build that culture in organizations so that you could actually build those problem finders?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I think this also goes back to the data you're using for hiring. So again, you know, we're an example of this. There are others. I think if you're going to stick with a resume, which quite frankly is a document of the past that tells us mostly something about our gender, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, quite frankly, it's almost impossible to remove those variables and actually get something meaningful out of it versus looking at people's cognitive, social, and emotional aptitudes. However you want to get that data, we get it in one way, there are other ways. And you use that. And by the way, that data is actually very unlinked to gender, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, right? If you do that, you can actually train, and we do this because we have to, on a relatively homogenous, say, Caucasian workforce, and actually find people from different races at an equal rate that they're applying that have those exact same aptitudes. Does that make sense? So it's really about getting better data on people to create diversity out of a workforce, you know, that's very homogenous. And back to the work that we're doing with Robbie's with Emphasis, I mean, think about finding that talent in community colleges, right? Right now, most of hiring is, you know, at the college level is really limited to, you know, four-year institutions and, you know, the elite four-year institutions. And, you know, there's a very sad stat, which is I think 19% of community college students have been homeless at one point in their life. Like that is a very different profile of a college student than, you know, the lovely Ivy League institutions that I'm a product of, right? So I think, but they have those same capabilities and they have the same ability to perform if we just give them the opportunity. So again, I think that diversity is about getting better data, different data, applying machine learning. And again, it's very similar to what the panelists are saying. It's not just taking the tools of the past and sort of tweaking at the edges. You really have to rethink your whole HR system and what are you doing to really bring it into modernity rather than, you know, thinking that if I apply, you know, an SVM to, you know, a resume parser data that I'm going to get a different outcome. It's just not going to work. So, yeah.
There's so much interesting conversation up here. I'm curious around human decision bias because behind, you know, George talked about the available opportunities in saving money, energy, optimizing activity. It's not about capability. It's really about how people are. And one of the things at Uptake that we've encountered and been a part of helping address is, well, a number of decision or current status biases that get in the way of progress. One is at a organizational level, the corporate matrix that has evolved over time in order to run a business the size of Johnson Controls, for example, has a series of P&Ls. The idea, and so the investment in innovation is easy to think about in a P&L, but the addressing of opportunity in a systemic way throughout a division or across divisions, or thinking about new opportunities across the enterprise, just doesn't have an incentive structure that makes it easy. And human beings tend to avoid that which is not incented. So at a board level, the idea of what is possible is not something that's widely familiar in terms of the conversation we're having today. So unless there's the incentive at a board level that provokes a CEO to feel some mandate, while we'd hope that every leader would take action as possible, possible is not always the defining construct for decision making. Again, coming down to incentives. And lastly, when we talk about diversity or ease of hiring or the need to pass skills down from experienced practitioners to those that might be more transactional in their approach to work, the opportunity or the need to give skills virtually and incent with certainty and outcomes, or even to create revenue models that just didn't exist before the opportunities we're talking about today. These are all things you'd hope would be done, but they're not happening. And so, Johnson Controls could sell productivity by the hour, or savings by the outcome, or sell equipment by the building versus by the machine itself. That is possible today. I think the job of a CEO and a board is to mandate the creative expression of opportunity right now and be on the forefront of defining whatever's next. That's the opportunity of a big incumbent to actually lean into that install base to leverage opportunity and not be reactive to it.
So let me, there's a lot going on up here.
Yeah, you have your work cut out for you.
So let me start with diversity, because I think exactly building off what Brad said relative to defining the problem, that the more diverse you can get, more diversity you can get in your customer base, cross-functional, across global diversity, all of that diversity together with our diversities, typically we come out with a better defined problem. And then therefore, from a resource deployment standpoint, you have a higher success rate of ultimately then solving the problem, right? So it does start where today you have traditional customers that maybe don't understand what the possible is. And there is a transformation that's happening across all industries. And the chief transformation officer in every industrial company is the CEO. I mean, I absolutely take all of your recommendations and can assure you that's exactly the current problem of the CEO, right? That you own the transformation, you see what the possibility is, and you're far more advanced in understanding what is possible. And now how do you we have a 130-year company. We invented the first thermostat, right? And now how do you get all of that legacy domain, and that's extremely valuable, but how do you get it repositioned so that you're not working in a silo, that you're working, leveraging all of our capabilities? To Ravi's point on learning, and we see this, because learning is the fundamental element to being able to be successful, because every individual across every domain or every functional activity, there's going to be significant learning. And what's happening is, and then that learning ties to organizational health. Successful companies that ultimately reinvent themselves and work through cycles is because they have high organizational health. High organizational health starts with engagement at the lowest level of the organization. Most legacy or old industrial companies that tend to be more top-down and more directive. In the new world, it's going to have to be where you're enabling that workforce right from the bottom up and empowering them to be able to drive change, not telling them.
What happens when the change that they want to drive is not necessarily centers of value creation? How do you reconcile that as a business operator?
So, we had, I was explaining, I went to a dinner last evening with the Lighthouse. What is it, Global Lighthouse? It was really focused around manufacturing and the revolution that's taken place there with manufacturing. And in every case, a successful manufacturing company that's deployed digital technologies and kind of changed the work, changed the jobs and the content of the jobs are much more towards the use of data and problem solving at a much higher level than more of the transactional activity that they have historically been responsible for. In every case, the employee engagement or the organizational health, huge step up. And so it's creating confidence at every level in providing the learning, providing the tools and capabilities that then individually and more broadly across the company deployed, there's just tremendous opportunity. And in the research that was put out today, when you go through the fundamentals of that research, it all applies. That in an organization of 100,000 people, how do you form a structure that no matter where you sit in the organization, you feel like you've got the tools to be successful in the role that you're in, but more important, you understand how that aligns with the bigger opportunity for the company. And that is the challenge as we go through this transformation.
On a lighter note, the last set of jobs, if you get disrupted, are CEOs, psychiatrists, and lawyers.
Exactly.
Is there commonality there? No.
So I have a whole other page of questions for you folks, but I want to see if anyone in the audience has questions for the panelists. We're happy to take them. Anyone? Right here.
One question, we talk about the bias in the systems, and obviously those who can correct the bias would be humans. But if the humans have their own biases, how do they correct the bias of the system?
I would say the humans don't correct the bias. I mean, again, as a cognitive neuroscientist, I can tell you that removing bias from humans is a fool's errand, really, quite frankly, and all the data that we have on unconscious bias training is basically shows it doesn't work. So I think it's actually far easier, and it's not easy, but it's easier to remove it from algorithms. And Sendhil Mulwani at University of Chicago made this case recently in a New York Times op-ed, because you can just look for statistical differences in the outcomes of algorithms across gender, ethnicity, whatever bias you are looking for. And then if you find it, you can do things to correct it. So again, techno-optimist, that's my response. It doesn't mean you should remove humans from the equation. That's not at all what we're saying. They can be mitigated, however, by these audited algorithms that can provide a counterweight to biased human decision-making.
In the back?
Thanks very much. My name's John Neal. I'm from Unipart Group in the UK. This is a great session, and I would love to hear the answer to how you figure out the curriculum to raise the digital quotient of a very diversified business.
Okay. Yep. I was going to add this to what you were saying earlier. Not that this is the answer, but one answer is go exactly where the operator, the actor in the organization is, and then give that person the same joy of learning something and mastering it that they have when they're playing Candy Crush or Words with Friends. Give them that experience of fun and pride and mastery at their role. And that is the job of companies like ours and Infosys. And I think all of us are probably struggling with how to make the opportunity absolutely familiar and joyful for each particular user. That's possible. It's not mysterious. I mean, we're talking about mastery opportunities around data science and insight delivered to people responsible for maintenance of machines, people in the repair and operations organization, people in the front line of parts ordering. All of these are not gamified per se, but you can be great related to possibility in relation to others in other companies, standards. All these things are part of what we do when we go home from work and what we like to do on our phones. The experience of graphic excellence and interactive excellence is something that technology companies must bring to each job within an organization, and it's possible.
I just want to add a slightly different perspective to what Brad said, amplifying on what you just mentioned. I think this whole lifelong learning piece has to start from K-12 schools. You have to build lifelong learners in K-12 schools because everything we're speaking of is going to change. 2 years ago when we were in Davos, everybody was paranoid about AI. I think the paranoia now is about solutioning and figuring out the way forward. So it's a much more positive optimism, if I may. I think the biggest shift of reskilling has happened from individuals to institutions. I think that's the big shift. All the past revolutions, including the Industrial Revolution, the reskilling agenda was individualistic. So it was very fragmented. Now I think the uplift is so high that organizations have to come together to do this, and governments have to start helping organizations to build that infrastructure. Governments are not wired for reskilling. Governments are wired for the first 25 years of human beings and the last 25 years of human beings to serve them. But the change is happening in the middle, and governments are not wired for the change in the middle. Going back to George's industry, I think the biggest challenge for reskilling and the curriculum building and bringing the workforce will be blue-collar jobs. How do you bring blue-collar jobs into the digital age? I call them the backbone jobs. And I think those lines will blur between blue and white-collar jobs. The supposedly, distinctive blue and white will blur to new-age digital jobs. That upliftment will be the hardest. The one you do from a factory worker to a...
Exactly. The question is, how do you do it? I mean, I built a company university, I've got faculties on the floor. In every operating company, you learn at 10, you do at 11. But the big challenge is how, exactly what kind of capability, resources, curriculum is necessary to make the shift, which is massive. How do you do it?
Yeah, so I would I'll give a perspective. I don't necessarily have the answer, but it starts at leadership. And so if I were to evaluate the digital acumen of my top 100 leaders in the company, today I would rate it fairly low. And it's only because they haven't been immersed maybe to the extent that I have been, or have the access to technology leaders and transformation leaders and to set the vision for the company, and then now go and find ways to go and execute it. So there is a level of, at every level of the organization, there's going to be, not everyone's going to be a software developer. But if you're a leader in the company, you've got to understand how digital applies to what you do to support the overall strategy for the company. And I think it does start there, because you can do it bottoms up. I mean, there's certainly today lots of capability you can begin to deploy at the manufacturing. Think of our company. We have manufacturing of products. We have technicians across the globe. And then we have a huge sales force across the globe. And so when you look at each one of those categories, just tremendous opportunity to provide some basic digital toolkit. But the only way that gets deployed is because the leadership knows how to use that toolkit to ultimately enhance their job, or to enhance the customer experience, or create better outcomes. And so it's a problem that is top to bottom in every company, and there's gaps at every level. And so you have to you got to start with leadership. You've got to obviously start with the basic programs that. And I think there's another thought, that this idea of continuous learning, we try to solve problems in big companies because we get people and we want to brainwash them and train them. That the new learning is, most learning can be done on your own, and there's tremendous learning capabilities online. How do you empower every employee to be able to capitalize on that opportunity, opposed to, we're going to tell you that you need this, and this if you're going to be successful, right? And so there's going to be a major, from a push to a pull for learning. It's going to have to be led and enabled by leadership, and there's going to have to be resource deployment to ultimately support it. So I don't know if it's any one answer, but that's kind of my perspective.
So, when we say blue collar worker, I'm assuming part of the discussion is not about worker, it's everywhere, because from CXO level, which I think most CXOs are out of their depth right now, they really don't know how to even attack technology. So from students to mid-level professionals to CXOs, what's going to bind them together when we talk about reskilling?
Can I take a stab at this? I mean,
Yeah.
I actually think that we are underthinking the utility of machine learning at scale for the purpose of reskilling. So if you think about what Amazon and all these other consumer platforms have done, it's basically to match consumers with the content that they want. You can use that exact same personalization of person to job to make the matching of somebody to a career, multiple careers over their lifetime, scalable with the right data and personalized algorithms. And I think it's more around this, we have to get away from this notion that either jobs or learning are one size fits all. I mean, back to the conversation you're just having, learning should be personalized, right? I can learn certain things very well because I have the aptitude for certain things. I would learn other things very poorly because I don't have that aptitude. So to tag me as somebody who has learnability or not is actually a false straw man. It's what can I learn and how quickly can I learn it? And that is all about personalization of education and job fit. And so I think that, it is leadership. Couldn't agree with you more. It is rethinking paradigms, but it's also we need to start thinking about technology in the learning and hiring space as a massive aid rather than this thing that's going to come along and destroy all jobs. Because yes, jobs are changing, going away over time, but many jobs are coming online. And how are we going to understand the fit to role when those roles are new and we don't even have never done them before? So we need to get data that will allow us to understand somebody's fit to those new roles and make that match as efficient and as productive as possible. So again, I really think that we're underestimating the value of machine learning platforms at scale to really help with this new problem of reskilling.
Yes.
Thanks for the interesting discussion. I really like this part about learning right now and also your question about the curriculum and how to facilitate this. I think one really important thing that we also should take into consideration is the part of teaching. So how do you actually teach people things? Because knowledge is available and there are millions of platforms out there where you can learn stuff about literally everything, but still people are not using it. I think two parts of the problem is, one part is that we're not teaching people how to be curious, and that we're not empowering people also to teach by themselves and share their knowledge. I think that's the biggest opportunity in many, many organizations, where there's so many smart brains that we just need to teach how to teach, and then the problem might solve itself.
Brad, I feel like you might have something to say about teaching people to be curious.
Look, I talk a lot about the role of students these days. It's not just to learn, it's to learn how to learn. And the problem is that the ACT and the other things that measure student progress don't account for resourcefulness, creativity, passion. They just require, or they talk to ability to regurgitate what you're told. So you're talking about start to finish rethinking of what education means, but I agree. Learning how to learn is what the future's about.
Eric? Let me run one over to you.
Actually, I have a question for Eric as well.
Oh, okay.
This
May
whole
I
thing
borrow
about biotech and AI coming together is very fascinating because it then changes the paradigm of the emotional quotient on jobs, mission workers and stuff like that, which is futuristic jobs. I suddenly think even machines can do that as well. If really biotech and AI can come together, they start reorganizing your biochemical reactions in your body.
Well,
and you start feeling happy or sad depending on what machines tell you.
That's a scary thought, and it's probably a realistic thought. And I'm going to say two things that are a little contradictory because it's at different time frames. I think in the long run, that is a real possibility. And even we're beginning to see, I work with Ron Al-Kaloubi about emotional detection and intelligence. And of course, to some extent, everyone who posts on Facebook or YouTube is trying to manipulate people's emotional valence, and it's working. And as we start tapping into some of the biochemical things, that just turbocharges it. That said, I want to pick up on what Brad said, that we are still, I think, a ways away from that sort of quasi-Orwellian future, or maybe it's Brave New World, where people can be so manipulated. And right now, I think that there's really an opportunity for us to do more about learning how to learn and creativity. And there's been a revolution at MIT that I think is worth conveying. You know, we used to spend a lot of time conveying facts and methods. Now, most of the courses I teach are very much project-based. It's all about here's a problem that a company has, or it's a real world one, it's real data. You guys figure out how to solve it, and that problem solving, like I said with Pablo Picasso, figuring out the right questions to ask is a huge part of what they learn. And also, almost always they work in teams. So there's a lot of interpersonal coordination. So we had 90 students in our analytics lab that each work with 25 different companies, each on projects, formulating the project and delivering something at the end, drawing on all these tools, drawing on machine learning, drawing on techniques, but a lot of that is their libraries they can tap into. So more and more, it's that. But this is not just at MIT. I think this has to happen at all levels. One of the tragedies is our public school systems in America, but even more in other countries, has been focused on getting people to sit quietly in rows of desks and listen and memorize and regurgitate. And even
teachers are not enabled.
and you know, they don't have power. But if you step back, any of us who have kids, we know that kids love being creative. You just put a pile of blocks in front of a child, 2 years old, 5 years old, or a pen and pencil, they will immediately start being creative, building things, creative. That's the natural instinct. And schools, for the past couple hundred years, have been trying to stamp that out. Stop doodling, stop being creative, just follow instructions. And if we would just unleash the creativity from K through 12 in college and in companies, we could do a lot more to take advantage of the relative strengths of humans.
And just one thing to add to that is I think that the paradigm for evaluating human beings is still very much, I mean, for those of us who have kids in school, it's testing, right? It's standardized testing that gets you into all these fancy institutions and everything else. That tells you nothing about your ability to be creative and collaborate and work in teams, right? So if that's going to now be the way that businesses really thrive, right? Not to mention that testing is a huge, reducer of, racial diversity, right? So we really have to, and these are the paradigms by which we evaluate whether somebody will or will not be successful and let them into schools, organizations, and everything. But the paradigm is, to your point, completely shifting. We need to work in teams. We know that more diverse organizations outperform, and yet we're using very old, antiquated paradigms for evaluating, human potential, which is unfortunate. Yeah, absolutely.
So, the most fascinating slide was about productivity. Yeah. And I find that interesting that if productivity is not improving or it's falling, where is the business case for investing in skilling and technologies?
That is the business case. Because the problem is not the technology. We have amazing technology, and I hope they keep pushing the frontier and doing amazing things. That gives us a set of tools. We are failing to translate them. And by the way, just to be clear, productivity isn't falling, productivity growth is falling, just to make that distinction. It's still growing, but not as fast as it used to grow. And the bottleneck is being able to have the skills to translate that, being able to ask, how can we reimagine work and create new products, new processes that take advantage of it? And one of the scary pieces of data I've seen over the past few years is from people like John Halterwanger, that business dynamism is going down. Everyone talks about the entrepreneurship, and you see it all around here. The reality is there are fewer business startups, there are fewer companies under age 5 years old, there's less employment in those companies, there's fewer people switching from one firm to another, not more, contrary. There's less mobility, moving from one physical location to another. Just about every metric of dynamism is falling. So if you have amazing technologies, but nobody has the skills or the dynamism or the flexibility to take advantage of it, you're not going to get productivity growth. Productivity doesn't come from the technology. It comes from people using technology.
Yeah, let me just comment on that because that's dead on. The only way you achieve productivity that you take, the whatever you're transforming and you restructure how you actually get the work done. For instance, if we provide technicians digital skill sets that then gives them the opportunity to be able to sell more, how do you then structure that into your conventional structure and then have the right incentives, right? So it requires a lot of restructuring transformation to take an existing organization and ultimately get it to, a structure that enables the entrepreneur with the new skill sets to be able to ultimately create more value and, in essence, higher productivity. And I think that is on these more of the traditional companies that are slow to change. That's ultimately the obstacle to get to the high because the digital capabilities are real. the productivity is real. It's where does it then show up in the P&L? You know, as far as how you're getting either increased sales or you're delivering more value that you're getting paid for by the customer, and or you're more efficient in doing the work that you do ultimately to support the customer.
I just had one other provocative thought, which again scares me a little bit. You know, the equilibrium between producers and consumers still keeps humans very relevant, because humans are going to be consumers. Now, there is a world we are going to go into where it might so happen that, you know, just as an example, a coal company selling iron to a robot and a robot selling robots to the coal company, and humans are irrelevant. So that equilibrium of producers and consumers, as it changes, I think the role of machines and role of humans is also going to be recalibrated. You know, maybe it's very futuristic, but it does look a little bit scary.
Can machines just make us happy and fine?
That's what I was saying. Like, if biotechnology comes in, machines can make us happy. And, you know, I was thinking the only workers in the end will be mission workers who will focus on happiness and sadness. Even that goes away. You know, it's very far-fetched, but
Maybe we all should go to Bhutan first, you know, to then
Bhutan?
be happy.
But if I can just add, I think this is, it sounds futuristic, but this is the conversation that we should be having, our leaders should be having, is what are our values, what are our goals? Because we have more powerful tools than we've ever had in history. And that means, by definition, we have more ability to shape the world. We can change it. You know, 200 years ago, there's limited things they could do to the planet or to humans. Today, we have a lot of options. But we have to go back and think, what are our values? Do we want to have people maybe plugged into tubes, getting a nutrient solution and smiling a lot? That's one kind of happiness. Another one is exploring the universe or transforming the world. Certainly, most of us would agree it starts with eliminating poverty and disease and some of the other challenges we have in front of us. But we can, if we want to, create a world of broadly shared prosperity with a lot of people thriving. We can create worlds with more concentrated wealth and power. We can create a lot of other things that maybe just in this room, it'd be hard to even imagine. But having a conversation about what are our values, what are our goals, and then moving the world towards that. Because, I mean, the good news is, over the next 10 years, we can do a lot to move the dial whichever direction we choose, if we choose it.
Yeah,
And
I'm
I-
really struck by what George has said. I'm sorry to cut you off. That so much of the responsibility for that rests with managers, you know, for people at the top of the food chain to educate themselves about what the opportunities are, so that the blue collar worker on the factory floor who's reskilling to, you know, whatever the next new technology is, can then channel that learning into something that is productive for the company, so that he's appropriately paid for it, or she, and it does start with some kind of reskilling of sorts at the top.
And I think it goes to how you think about countries and humanity. Democracy is a uniquely poorly organized foundation for machine learning, for technology deployment, et cetera. So too, and the reason, especially for machine learning, when there's a different construct than, hey, will you please think about joining, and it's more, you're going to join the effort to be better through data and insight, you can get better results. Now, it might have different values underpinning those results and a different construct of the governing model for the society.
Great point.
Similarly, with companies, when a leader says, we are going to take advantage of every ounce of data and expertise that we have, period, end of story. I understand that there's different incentives and different organizational silos, but we're all part of the same team. That company should have a better outcome over not a long period of time, because they're taking advantage of something that is valuable today called data that might not have been discretely valuable yesterday. So that asset called data, which is currently doesn't show up on a balance sheet, is the orienting factor to what I think Eric's describing.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing, when it takes a lot of courage and confidence, that it goes back to our initial discussion, problem solver, problem finder, that we're all here because we're problem finders, and we believe, you know, we see the possibility, right? And then when you go back, you know, the average individual doesn't have that opportunity to see what the possibility is. And so it's having the courage and the conviction and confidence that as leaders, we can be much bolder. And we are into, I mean, it's historically it's been incrementalism, right? You apply technology kind of inside out, incremental, making things better incrementally versus right to left to say what is the possible and how do you get leaders to step up and come together to realize what the possible is and then begin to deploy resources along those lines. I think there needs to be a fundamental shift.
The other question to ponder is liberal economies, liberal democracies, are they the right model for the world of AI? Because AI is going to actually build a few monopolies of AI companies which are going to own algorithms. I'm not sure. Is there a different way of governing countries and governing corporations?
So we're over time, but I wanted to reclaim a few minutes back from Trump. And so last question, lightning round for any of our panelists. What is one thing that companies can or should do right now to shape new talent or reshape existing talent in ways that they will find to be most fruitful?
So I would, what we're trying to, what we're trying to do is just, this is a huge learning opportunity, and to embrace it at every level of the organization, provide the leadership. And what I've found, high-performing organizations start at the bottom. And the sooner you can get the capability to the bottom of the organization and empower them, then that's when magic happens. And I have the opportunity to engage with employee groups, and just recently engaged with a new group of employees that came into our commercial team. And what they do as part of that training, they solve problems. And they came back and solved or enhanced some of our commercial processes with solutions that would never have been, told to them. It came back to us to say, hey, we solved the problem. And it was utilizing their digital skills, this new academia around teamwork and solving problems as a team was absolutely front and center. So I'm encouraged that the new, this next generation workforce gets it. They just want to be empowered and enabled, right? And then we have a task to ultimately bring the rest of the organization along. If we empower that group, they're going to lead the way. And if leaders can leverage that and create a learning culture, then that's what ultimately will solve the problem. But there's no magic to it. You gotta actually commit to it and then ultimately execute.
Lightning round, I would say evaluate people differently.
Good answer.
I'd say big change takes big change. So there has to be the risk must be taken in order to have outcomes like George is talking about.
So in the era of multiple professions in humankind for individuals, building lifelong learners will be key.
Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thanks to our panelists.